Okay, so good morning and welcome to a special webinar in our series that we've been doing. My name is David Orr. I'm the director here with the New York State LTAP Center, the Cornell Local Roads Program. And in follow on to some of the webinars and workshops we've been doing online on federal aid and finding money, we're going to talk today about grant writing. And we have a special guest who's the director with the Ohio LTAP Center, a great colleague and someone I've learned a lot from. And we borrow and share with each other all the time. And so I want to give a nice warm welcome to Victoria Beal, and we'll let her get started. She's going to be using a tool called Menti.com, and she'll explain that more. We're not using our standard one. So we'll get started. And remember, open up your chat pod so you can get a link to the handout. And if you have a question, throw it in the Q&A. I'm looking for your answers in the Q&A, and I'll make sure we get them answered before the end of our hour together. Victoria, it's all yours.
Thank you, David, and thank you for the warm welcome there. Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be with you this morning and talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and that is grant writing and really how to get started with grant writing. So I do use the Menti system, and you've been provided a direct link to Menti in the chat, but if you for whatever reason don't want to use that or can't access that, you can always go to menti.com and enter the code that is showing there on the screen, 84944302. This is live, and we're going to be doing some real-time interaction during the webinar this morning because I would like to know more about you as the audience, so I can hopefully tailor what I'm going to be discussing with you better as we go through things this morning. So a little bit about myself. I've been with the Ohio LTAP Center now going on close to 15 years, and during that time I have written numerous grants to be able to secure funding to provide training for our folks here in Ohio. And I am approaching or close to, or if not pushed over the $1 million mark now with what I've been able to attain through grant funding. I also personally, outside of work with different nonprofits in my community in order to help them secure grants. Different volunteer fire departments, different organizations that work on community revitalization. So when I'm talking to you this morning, I'm talking to you from the perspective of somebody who has been through this process a number of different times. And hopefully some of the tips and tricks I'll be able to share with you will be helpful for you, especially if you've never been down this path. Don't be fearful of it. If you know that there are grants available and that it can help your program or your agency, definitely look into it and move forward. And, if it's the right fit, as we discussed this morning, try to get started on this path because I think it's a tremendous feeling when you know that you've been able to secure funding that's going to help those you work with and your program or your agency. So hopefully you've been able to get into Menti either through another screen on your computer or through your smartphone. So we're going to move into the first Menti question, and I just like to know, what is your employer type? So good, we've got lots of dots showing up on the screen. And while you're voting, I do want to mention in the handouts, you have two separate handouts. One is a handout of the slides we'll be reviewing today, but the second one is an outline of our presentation today. I like to do that because I feel that it gives you a more succinct version of the information that's being provided. So hopefully you'll find those helpful after the webinar today. It looks like we're getting lots and lots of votes, so that's wonderful. I like to see that. And our primary audience are local public agencies, but we do have some folks from the state DOT, I'm guessing, or other state agencies, so welcome. Our LTAP Center here in Ohio actually is located in the DOT. We're part of our Office of Local Programs. So I consider those folks amongst my colleagues, so welcome. And we have consultants and contractors or construction firms and folks from other agencies as well. So that's great. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on. Thank you for voting on that. The next thing I'd kind of like to know is what is your experience level with writing grants? So, and I know this will probably be all over the board, but even if you check that I'm a pro part, it's always a good thing just to refresh the information that you have already or what you've been doing, and look for others that have tips or tricks that can help out with what you're working on. So it looks like the majority of you who voted so far are just getting started, and that's great. This is the webinar for you because it gives you that basis and basically a process, some steps that we're going to go through. So that's great to see. All right. Well, the majority of you have either just a couple of years of experience or are just getting started. But for those who have been at it a while, please feel free to use the chat to share your also things that you've learned through the process. And for those of you who are just getting started or have been doing it just for a few years, please make sure you drop your questions into the chat. I know that David is going to be reading those questions off to me as we go through. So like anyone that works in transportation, I like to give you a roadmap of what we're going to be covering today. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through and determine what the needs are that you want to get covered through grant funding. And that's so very important because you have to know what your need is or you can't write the grant application. And then we're going to talk about gathering information and then how you look for grants that address your needs, how to go through that grant packet and figure out the requirements and how you're going to address those, and then how to set up a strategy to get your grant application written, what you want to request, and then a big part of the application process is answering the questions that are asked. Um, that's so very, very critical, and we'll cover that. And then relationship building, which I feel is also a critical component of the grant writing process. So there's our roadmap for this morning. And we're going to go ahead and launch right into the step one of determining your need. And you see those sticky notes on there, the want, need. Kind of reminds me of my kids, I want, but then, it comes right down to it. You have to focus on needs first. And that's very important because, grant funders, they are not going to provide funds for wants for the agency. But, when it comes right down to it, needs are what they will fund. And you've got to be very careful to make sure that what you're asking for money for is a need for your agency and that you are able to demonstrate the need. So you want to make certain that with your grant application that you have a clear plan for what you're going to spend the funds on. You want to be able to describe the problem that's going to be fixed with the grant funding, and explained to them why it is a need. And especially with a lot of the federal grants, now there are some new, not new, but some additional information that they are requiring be provided concerning different demographics for the groups that are going to be impacted by the funding that's being provided. So you want to make sure you get ahead of that and, make certain that you're collecting that information and can show the need and why it is a need. And we're going to talk about that more this morning. But you also want to have a clear plan for what you're going to spend those funds on. Because, if you aren't able to very specifically show where their money is going to go, they're not going to give it to you. I mean, that's what it comes down to. So you want to make certain that you have that as a part of your application. So again, with determining the need, make certain too that you can show them a clear plan for delivering the project. No one wants to fund someone who doesn't have a clear path as to how they're going to accomplish the project. And especially with construction projects, this is a little easier to do. If you have more of a planning project, you're working through something that is a little less concrete than, building a road or doing improvements. It's more of a planning aspect. You want to make sure still that you're laying out your plan, the steps that are going to be followed, how you're going to measure success. They want to see that you have goals and that you know what it is that not only you're going to spend the money on, but how it is that you're going to show once the money's been spent that you've been successful in completing the action or the project that you've asked for the funding for. And then know upfront how you're going to cover ongoing costs without further grant funding. That a lot of grants will be very specific in saying that, this is a one-time grant and that, while we're providing funds for this build or for, this sign installation, that the grant recipient, the grantee, has to be able to do the ongoing maintenance or upkeep. So you have to be able to demonstrate how, once you receive these funds, you're going to be able to maintain what it is this grant has purchased for you. Because if you can't show them that, then they're more likely not to give you the money for what you've asked for. So once you get through that first step, then, well, and actually let's do a quick Menti question here. In a word or two, tell us, now that you've kind of primed the pump and thinking about needs, some of the needs that you have that you want to get funded through grants. And this is a response question. You can put your answers in and they'll start showing up on the screen, and that if we get a bunch of them, it'll actually start scroll. Oh, I did a word cloud on this one. Sorry, forgot about that. But bridges is front and center. So that's also a big need in our state. Very good. If you type in a word that, or words that are already on the screen, they just get larger. So we see ADA compliance on there. Education, there are grants out there to provide funding for education. Safer roads, absolutely. I see community garden, that's great.
A couple of people have thrown into the chat pod internships and salt storage.
There we go.
Well, it's actually the Q&A we're using on the chat, but yes, the Q&A. Yeah.
I'm just glad to see so many folks responding. And I'll provide these slides to David, the ones with that actually have the Mentimeter responses in it afterwards. So
let's be honest, you need to supply them to Amanda and Jody. They're the ones who'll actually get it posted. So
there we go. Very good. Thank you for all your responses. And a lot of the responses on here are what I see when I offer this webinar in Ohio as well. So there are funding sources out there that you can tap into for these needs. And, I definitely encourage you to network with each other as well, because, when you start applying for grants, then you can build a network of others who are applying as well. And while, they may apply for one grant one year, then they can give you information on how it went or what they got funded, and you might be able to tap in and apply the following year. So the second step in the process is just gathering general information. And these two steps, actually, you can do anytime. You don't have to wait for a grant application to be available. And especially the second step, I highly encourage you, even after this webinar is completed today, if you don't have this information together, start gathering it. You want to make sure you can communicate to them who you are and what you do, and why it is that you are so important to those that you're servicing. So, get your table of organization together, start a file, get these general pieces of information gathered ahead of time. If you're a nonprofit, then you want to make sure that you have your board of directors information together, along with the table of organization. Also, your information on who you are. When I apply for grants for our LTAP center, I actually, since we sit in the state DOT, have to include information showing that we are under the state of Ohio. So when they ask for our tax ID number, my LTAP center doesn't have a specific tax ID number for us. We are just lumped together under the whole state of Ohio. And that was good for me to figure out ahead of time and have that information in the file ready to go. Because it took me a little bit when I first started writing grants to cipher all that out through finance. So, it's important to get the pieces together. If you're a nonprofit, your IRS nonprofit determination letter, you want to make sure that you have that ready to go. And then, you also want to have information that shows that you have completed projects of the same size or scope that you're asking for funding for. So, in the image here, it's showing a bridge, and a lot of you had said bridge in the needs response that you question that we had just a few slides ago. So, get information about other bridge projects that are same or similar that your agency has completed that you can show that were successful and, delivered on time, on budget, or, maybe even ahead of time and under budget. So you can have that information ready to go into grant applications that you'll be writing. So one thing I want to make sure I emphasize to you while we're talking about gathering information is that the DUNS numbers, which had been a very important part of applications in the past, are out. The federal system has switched to unique entity identifiers, UEI. And if you have not gone into the federal system, the sam.gov, and gotten that new UEI number and made certain that your profile has been updated so you're active, you need to go in and get that done, meaning DONE, not DUN. But, please make sure that you get that taken care of ahead of time. Right now, in our state, we have a grant application period open for our townships, and we are spending time on the phone daily with them, trying to make certain that they have their profiles updated and they have this new UEI, because that has to go on the agreement if they receive funding. And if they don't have that number, excuse me, ahead of time, then the application is not even really being considered in our state. So get that taken care of. So based on the general information that we just talked about, how many of you already have that collected up? Just curious, do you have it? Do you not have it? Are you starting from scratch? So it looks like a few of you have got it gathered up. That's great. Looks like there's quite a few of you, though, that have some homework to do after this webinar. So book some time into your schedule and get those pieces collected up, because once the grant application, comes out, you're going to have enough work to do on putting together the information specific to that. So, make sure that you get this other portion taken care of ahead of time and have it ready to go. All right. Thank you, everybody, for your responses here. And kudos to those of you who do have it together. That's probably the ones that have been doing it for a while. All right. So the next step in the process is to look for grants that are addressing the needs that your agency or organization has. So, and that photo that was on there showed the square peg in the round hole. Question here for a lot of you: are you subscribed to grants.gov? And I'm not necessarily promoting it, but this is the source where Federal Highway puts out all of their grants that are available. So if you're not subscribed to them, it would be a very good idea, if you do want to get information about federal grants, to get subscribed to them. Get an account set up, because that's the way you're going to actually apply for federal grants, is through grants.gov. And it's not limited to just local public agencies applying. Organizations, nonprofits can apply as well. But, definitely if you're a local public agency, get subscribed to them, and then you can actually get notification too when grants are posted. So again, it looks like quite a few of you have some homework to do in this area. So you can put that on your to-do list along with gathering up information, general information about your agency or organization.
Victoria, just
Yes.
quickly, I just posted in the chat pod, so you do want to open
Mhm.
your chat pod, the grant opportunities for New York State, because they have their own website for state grants. It's Grants Management NY. You can also just search New York State grants. It'll pop right up, but
That's
put that in
awesome.
the chat. Yep.
That's very nice that your state has that. In our state, we kind of have to know who has what grants available and go search it out on the different agency websites. So the fact that your state has a one-stop shop, just like the feds do, is fantastic. All right. So when we're talking about looking for grants that address your needs, um, make sure that as you're going through that, you're very careful to just select grants that can truly address your needs. Um, you don't want to just apply for anything and everything that comes down the pike, because when we get to talking about relationships towards the end of this hour, it's really important that you not waste people's time. And if you apply for grants that don't intend to fund the need that you have, a lot of the grantors will see that as wasting their time, and it'll kind of give you a bad reputation. So don't do that. Make sure that you are applying just for grants that want to fund what your needs are. So, who is the grant funding? That's probably a threshold question. Make sure that you fit the group who they intend to fund. Like, there are specific grants that are just for local public agencies, and there are other grants that are just for nonprofits. And you can always, try to work with someone on and build a team to apply for grants. I've seen that happen here in my community where they had a school district that took the land where our community park was, where the kids all played ball and baseball, softball, football. So the community got together and the township was the local public agency. And then they got some community members to form a nonprofit group to support the building of a new park. And then depending on who could be funded, whether it was the local public agency or a nonprofit, then that group would write for the grant and the other one would help to support. Look at what the grant is intended to address. Again, that's what your need is. If it doesn't fit the square peg round hole, don't try to make it fit. Don't try to, talk your way through that application, and don't just apply for the experience. Again, make sure you know what it is how you're going to measure success, but also look to see what your grantor has listed as far as how they measure success, because you might need to go through and retool, what it is that your measurements are in order to meet what the application is asking for. Step 4, once that you've decided you want to apply for the grant, then it's really important to spend some time reading that document through very, very carefully and taking it apart and what I call putting it back together, but on your own time frame, because you want to make certain that you're working backwards from the due date and get the pieces figured out, and by when you're going to have information ready to go into that application. So, you need to figure out what the due date is, how long do you have to apply for it? Um, what do you actually need to submit as a part of that grant application? Make certain that you're getting that information ready. Pull a team together if you need to, because you need to make certain that you have the support and have the time to get this all completed. I mean, I don't know if you're lucky enough to be the grant writer for your agency, then, you can spend all of your time on this. But as David mentioned, when we started the webinar, I'm the director for the Ohio LTAP Center. So when I write a grant, I'm doing it on top of everything else. So setting out the time frame and getting my plan together for how I'm going to get things submitted is really, really important. Another part of a grant, and I think a lot of folks don't take this into consideration when they're writing the application, is what are the reporting requirements? Um, this can actually be even more in depth than the initial application, is the reporting that you need to do once you receive the money. So make certain that you build that into your process, because if you get the funds and then all of a sudden, there's no one there to help support the reporting requirement, then, you could potentially be put in a situation where the grantor says, well, you didn't complete the required reports, so you need to repay us the money per the terms of the grant. And you definitely do not want that to happen. So make certain that you address any reporting requirements in your plan up front. And there are some requirements as well, when you start looking at the environmental aspect, that there's in-depth reporting, but there's also, requirements that will live with a piece of land if you receive that type of funding. Here in Ohio, our Section 4F or Section 6F funds under the environmental section, if they give us money for a park, and this is one thing we found out in our community, the land that was acquired for the new park that was put together to replace the one where the land was the school district took, we did receive funding under the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And that means that that has to be a park forever now. And there's signage that's put up, and it's a really important requirement to know about. So if you're working through a project and you see those types of requirements along with it, then you need to have some additional discussions to make certain that everybody understands and realizes the impact of receiving that funding. And then the two CFR 200 requirements, those came into effect a few years ago now, but when it happened, the federal requirements then were put in place about tracking time and labor that's being charged not only to the project, but for any individual that's working on the project. They wanted to see all the hours worked during the week, not just what got charged to the project, because they wanted to make sure how those hours were being charged. So, if there's those type of requirements, you need to have discussions with your finance department, make sure you have the right systems in place to be able to do that type of reporting. And I'm not trying to scare you off. I'm just trying to point out that there are some requirements that can be a bit more onerous that you just have to work through on the front end. But still, don't let that stop you from applying for the funding. Just take some time and work it out, get it figured out. Normally grants will also provide you a scoring matrix as to how the applications are going to be scored. And this is another thing that I look for first in the application as well, because to me, we want to make certain that we are putting the proper emphasis on answering the sections and making certain that we are getting as many points as we possibly can for our efforts in the grant application. So that's a very important part of your planning process. All right, so as you've taken that grant application apart now, then you want to put together your completion strategy and think through the details. Think through your questions and your responses, the financial plan, what additional information are you going to need? On that additional information, you may have to pull in partners to get more information in for the application. So you need to contact them ahead of time. There was an application that I wrote, I want to say it was 2 years ago now, and there were a number of partners that we were required to have as a part of the application process. And these folks were across the country. So I had to contact them, set up meetings, discuss the grant, request, letters of support from them, and collecting those up. Don't tell them the very last day the application is due for them to get you your letter of support. Found that learned that the hard way. So, try to get those letters of support, a few weeks prior to the application being due to make sure that there's no hiccups in getting those to you. On your financial plan, you know, please don't wait to the last minute on that. Get that laid out pretty early on and then double and triple check your numbers. Um, because they will go through and use their calculator, add things up and make sure that you didn't miss anything. And there's nothing worse than having them come back to you, especially if you get the opportunity to present to them on your grant application and have them ask you, well, why did these numbers not match up? I mean, you don't want to be standing there with egg on your face. So make sure that you work that whole process through. I talked earlier about getting a team together. And some applications, it really needs to be a team. You need to be more of a project manager than the person who's doing it all. So, like I said, early on, get the application out, read it through, take it apart, put together a time frame, talk to those who are in your agency and, ask them for help, give them assignments if you can, you know, to help you and have them complete different parts of it. So you want to make sure that you're putting your team together, especially with the more in-depth applications. And then, you want to do progress meetings along the way. Just check in, make sure that they're on task with things, because if something happens and they need to step away and they can't support you, then you'll still have some time if you're doing those progress meetings to either find someone else to help or to shift your schedule around to get it taken care of. So, and again, your time schedule is critically important. I can't emphasize this enough. So make sure that you're having those touch base meetings and keeping yourself coordinated and everybody else coordinated as well. If you are lucky enough to have a grants coordinator, then obviously this person's the one who's going to be doing the bulk of the lift. But if you don't, and it's you doing this in addition to the rest of your responsibilities, make sure that the others that are working with you understand that. And, I'm certain that they will, and I'm certain that they will realize the value of what it is that you have taken on. But it's really important that, everybody understand that, you're all doing this in addition to your regular responsibilities. And hopefully those who you've asked to be a part of helping you with this will be committed to getting you the information that you need and the schedule that you've discussed. So just curious, does your agency have a grant coordinator? Well, I knew no was going to come up because the majority of agencies don't. The only time I've really seen grant coordinators, especially in local public agencies, are the biggest cities here in Ohio. Like I know Columbus does. I imagine I haven't talked to Cincinnati directly or Cleveland, but I imagine they do as well. But the majority of our communities don't. David?
One thing to think about for those who are in them is sometimes metropolitan planning organizations may have somebody who can help you with your grant.
Absolutely. MPOs are a tremendous assistance, for our locals here in Ohio. And I don't know if you guys have them, but Ohio also has what they call RTPOs, Rural Transportation Planning Organizations.
We don't have those, but we have regional planning and development boards
Great.
that cover a large percentage, and then something called the Tug Hill Commission, which serves almost like an MPO/rural planning organization.
That's wonderful.
So reach out and talk to them and get some help.
That's great. Absolutely. All right. So it looks like the majority of you do not have a grant coordinator. One agency has it, but they rotate it around. 14 of you are very lucky to have dedicated grant coordinators, and 5 of you aren't sure, but that's okay. You can always ask that question after this webinar. I love this little cartoon. Just had to include it here because we're talking about, getting a plan together, making sure you have a time frame, and life happens, and it's talking about being ahead of the curve, and then the curve ran over them. Sometimes you're going to be on track to do an application, and it's just not going to happen for one reason or the other. And that's okay, because the applications there, it's cycles. Normally it'll come back up again next year. So you'll be that much farther ahead, right, David?
Yes, absolutely. It's better to have a plan. It's also, that's why you mentioned time frame earlier. It's so important. Though I am an engineer, my first thought was, I wonder if it was properly signed, but oh well.
Yeah. I mean, don't beat yourself up if life happens. Just decide, okay, next time the application opens up, we're going to be that much farther ahead. And you can even start working on pieces and parts leading up to it. So let's talk about what to request, because this I've seen the applications get submitted. I've been a part of the grant writing community long enough now that I do get called upon occasionally to actually help when I'm not applying for a grant, to help score applications that have come in. And these are some of the things that I've seen that kind of shoot an applicant in the foot. Rarely are you going to find a grant that's going to provide 100% of the ask of what it is that you want to have funded. So don't expect that going into the grant. You know, also, grants will rarely cover ordinary operating expenses unless it's something that's being funded to like get a program started. So, the only time they will cover what I would consider operating expenses is when it's actually something being charged directly to the grant project. So, figure out in their application, you know, what is it that they're willing to fund, and make sure that's the only part that you ask for. Don't include other pieces, because if you start asking for things that they said, that they didn't list as actually items they would fund, they're going to say, no, this person didn't understand the intent of the application. And if if they're not understanding that, then they probably aren't going to understand how to really, administer the funds. So we'll not give it to them. So be very careful with that. And you need to decide too, what is it, can your agency actually contribute to the project as your portion, and make sure that it's part of your financials in there. Is it funds that you can contribute, or is it in kind? A lot of times applications will say you can do in kind. Well, that means that you can commit that labor that is going to be spent by your agency on the project is part of the match. So if that's, part of the application, then make sure that that's spelled out in your financials. We also mentioned earlier about working with nonprofits. If you're a local public agency, or if you're a nonprofit working with a local public agency, talk to each other and get, things set up where you can help support each other. Because if you're a local public agency, say in our state, a township, a lot of times they'll go to a nonprofit and say, well, we have this opportunity to get this funding, but we need a match. Can your nonprofit help with the match? Will you give us a letter of support saying that you'll help with the match? You know, another thing, and I'll talk about it with you here in a minute, but look at all of the nonprofits that are out there. Don't just look at those that are obvious on the surface. So in Menti, and it says press enter to show answers. Tell us, if you wouldn't mind, some of the other funding sources that you have found that can help you with the match portion. We've listed so far community preservation funds, CMAQ, in our community, foundations. First time you're applying for a grant, that's okay. If you've never done this before, this is a list that you're going to want to take away with you. I just, through my community, when looking for, other groups that could help with matches, have gone out and done a Google search for, like my county name or my community name, and Form 990. That is the federal tax return that nonprofits have to file on an annual basis. And that is publicly available to anyone once it's filed. So you can usually find that out on the website or through Google. And a lot of times you'll find that there are nonprofits that you weren't even aware of that exist in your community. You can also go to the IRS website and do a search for nonprofits and narrow it down. I've narrowed it down just to my county and found that there were different foundations that I wasn't aware of that existed that were looking to help fund different projects. There's funds that from different foundations have been used that I'm aware of for matching funds for different local let projects here in our state. So yep, there's a lot of information that's coming up on the screen here. Toll credits. David, do you guys have toll revenue credit there in New York? I know we have it here in Ohio, and that's a whole nother conversation.
It's in limited cases where they match up with the authorities that have the toll systems,
Yeah.
and there are a few, but
Okay.
most of those know about them because they're obviously dealing directly with those tolling agencies.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, here in Ohio, it is limited too, but yeah, that's something that, definitely take that back as a thought or an item for the future. So yes, there's a lot of great information that's been entered here, and I encourage you to tap into not only the list that has been given, there's been 45 different answers, but also get out there and do some Googling and figure out what other nonprofits or foundations are in your community that can help you with that match portion. One thing that I'll give you a little example of a project, and this is in that park that I was talking about. The park's been in existence now for about 12 years, 13 years, but the township wanted to add a playground. They had ball fields that were built. They had 7 different baseball fields, softball fields. They had a football field, but they had nowhere for the little kids to play. So they worked with a local scout to get the 25% match for a land and water conservation grant. And the scout did a scrap metal drive. They did a hat day at the local high school, solicited donations from the community, and the project ended up receiving funding to the tune of $13,000, with 25% of that being the match that the scout was able to raise. And then the scout coordinated the installation of the project. The township, the digging of the foundation, the footer for the playground area was in kind on the township's part. So, I mean, it was a great way for them to get some funds and get a playground installed, for the community. And, they were able to leverage those sources. So I definitely would encourage you to look and see what's available. And then you can also use some grants or funds to leverage other grants or funds.
He looks
And
real familiar, by the way.
he does, doesn't he, David? Yeah. So anyway, with our process here, let's the application. What I consider is step 7 is making sure, as I'm putting it together, that I am answering the questions that were asked on the application. And I think of Joe Friday here. I'm dating myself, I know, but just the facts. They usually will give you a section where you can introduce your agency, but when it gets down to answering the questions in the application, just respond to the question. Don't try to, give more information than what they're asking for, and use plain language. I got to tell you, if you're a grant reviewer and you're sitting down to review these, I had some that I did earlier in 2022, and there were 13 different applications, and some of them were almost 200 pages in length. The ones that used the plain language and gave me the answer to the question were the ones that I scored higher than those who went off on a tangent and, were trying to give me information that wasn't being asked for in response to a question. So, that's definitely something that you want to make sure that you focus on is plain language. Explain your terms that you're using that are specific to our industry, and be very careful not to use too many acronyms. Make sure you always introduce your acronym when you first use it. That's important as well. You don't want to put them on acronym overload syndrome, as the sign says here. And then give details when they ask for them, but don't go overboard with your details, because you don't want it to be like this poor person here that, they probably just asked for a simple answer to a simple question. And, we might have had a very overzealous grant writer that decided that all of this needed to be included. Is
So,
there a question?
yeah, there's a question which is a good time for it. It has to do with guidance on a benefit cost ratio, which a lot of grants want to know the return on investment or the
Mhm.
benefit cost ratio. And we obviously want them to be above one. Most of them are, but in this case, he was calculating numbers as high as 300 as a benefit cost ratio. Is there an upper limit?
There's not an upper limit normally, but I would be very careful to have somebody else look it over and make sure that you haven't missed something. Because, while we definitely want it to be more than, 1-to-1, when you start getting into those higher numbers, it can start to be questionable. So you don't want to shoot your credibility. So, and normally your colleagues are happy to have that conversation with you. I know when we were working on, a benefit cost ratio here in Ohio, and we were using some highway safety manual methodology. When we started pushing into 60s, 60-to-1, we went back and made sure that we didn't miss anything, because that seemed like, for highway safety manual methodology to be a pretty high number. So yeah, I mean, but if you feel confident that, that's really the type of benefit that can be gained, then, move forward with what you've calculated. What we did is, since it was in the 60 number, we felt that was kind of high. We looked at it in two different ways and explained both of them. And we had one that was more 30-to-1 and then 60-to-1. So that way they could say, okay, well, yeah, we see where you got to 60-to-1 over here, but we want to accept the 30-to-1, which is still really good. So see if there's a way too that you might be able to explain it that gives a little lower or more realistic cost benefit.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. So consistency. As you are working through your application and you have your team together, you need to have one person be your reviewer at the end, because people have different writing styles and different ways of saying things. And you want to make sure you have a consistent voice throughout the whole application. I've seen it where they've had a team of people writing the application, and one person will call something by one name in one section, and somebody will call it by another name in another section. So get your final reviewer set up as a part of your schedule and make sure they have plenty of time to go through and, do what they need to do to make that a consistent voice. Relationships. And I do have this as number 8, but really this is critical all throughout. And you'll understand it, especially for those of you who haven't been writing grants yet. As you start on this process, you're going to learn, who the folks are that give the grants, and start building relationships with them. That's so very critical. Never ever pass up the opportunity to present on a grant request if you're invited, because even if you don't get funded, that gets you introduced to the people who are reviewing your applications, and lets you start learning who they are, let them start learning who you are, because relationship building is so very key in grant writing. Be persistent about your application as far as follow-up, but don't make yourself a pest. This little girl here, the look on her face is not what I want somebody to have on their face when I call to follow up on an application. We had one here in Ohio that was applied for, and I know our federal partners are incredibly busy. But after the application wasn't awarded by the date that they said they were going to, and it continued to push out and push out, we just decided we weren't going to call anymore because we did not want that person to say, oh, here they are again, asking about this. And obviously there's something going on, that reason why the decisions haven't been made yet. And we didn't want to turn ourselves into pests. So again, if you have that relationship, it's easier to kind of determine if you are getting close to crossing the line with somebody. Another thing I look at is, what has the organization funded in the past? And sometimes I'll even say, do you have examples of the applications that have been funded that I could look over? I think that's really important to see, what have they funded in the past? What is it that they're looking for in projects, to try to make sure that, our project is going to fit what they have funded in the past. All right, for those of you who have been working with grants for a while, share with us some ways that you've learned what grantors have funded in the past. I know I mentioned to you asking for a list of what they've been funded, or asking to see applications. The other thing is that nonprofit tax return that I mentioned as well. In there, those nonprofits have to list the largest projects that they've funded or largest grants they've given. So you can always look at that. Looking at the list of awards, absolutely. Look at the website or online. Yes, I mean, it's important always to be candid, but press releases, absolutely, to see who's being funded, what's being funded. That information is very important. So I know in our newsletter that we send out whenever we highlight a grant program that our other side of our office offers, then we always give examples of projects that have been funded in the past, so we can hopefully help other LPAs to see themselves as a future grant recipient. Provided a list of past funding with NOFOs, also found lists of award online, absolutely. Talking to the grantors, yes. Attending webinars, asking past recipients in their region, absolutely. If you have a local public agency in your area and you know them and they got funded, call them up and ask them, hey, can I see a copy of what you sent in? What is it that you asked for specifically? Get details. So that's great. Thank you guys very much for all the information you've shared here. And another thing I've done too, when I've talked to folks, the grantors, is I've not only asked for feedback, if I haven't been funded, well, what is it that we could have done better? What is it that, might make us, someone you would be willing to fund the next grant cycle? I also ask them for their knowledge of other grants, because the grantors, those who are giving grants, they seem to run in the same circles, or work through and connect with others who provide grants as well, and they can give you information on other grants that they know of that are out there. Because a lot of times what they'll see is that an application will come in for their funds, but the person who's asking for the funds will list other grants that they're leveraging as that matching portion. So it gives them a leg up, I guess, on knowing about other sources, because they see those in the applications. All right, we're down to the question part. So we've still got, I think, 7 minutes here. If there's any other questions that have come into the chat.
So far in the Q&A, we've got one about can use congressional spending money with grants.
Congressional spending money, that's something I have never ever tapped into, but I could definitely look into that. I guess I didn't realize that that was its own special category there. I guess
Yeah.
I've always seen congressional funds, or thought congressional funds were the funds that were then budgeted for the agencies out of the federal budget, but we can look into that.
I don't have anything specifically listed in the Q&A, and folks, please
Okay.
put your questions in if you've got anything. Take advantage
Absolutely.
of Victoria being here.
Yep.
Um,
And I've also put my contact information up on the screen because if some of your audience is like me, they'll come up with a question later.
of course.
Yeah, I have to
Well,
have
that's
time sometimes to think things through.
well, that's when we have the handouts available for folks,
Yep.
and so folks can review them, both the outline and, of course, some of the resources and references that are available.
I
Um,
don't know all the answers, but I've been doing this for a while and I'm happy to help you. And, if I don't know the answer, I'll help you try to track down the right answer, like the question on the congressional funds. I'll do some research into that today and get a response back to David so he can share it with everybody. But once you've been on one of my webinars for grant funding, I'm always happy to take questions, email, call me. Um, and David is a tremendous source of information as well. I know that he has a lot of experience in a number of things, so I'm certain he can be a good contact for you too. But you do have copies of my slides to download, and then you have the more succinct two-pager with the presentation outline on it.
yeah.
So I just want to encourage you though, don't be afraid to go down this path. You know, you may not succeed the first time, and that's okay because we learn from our experiences. Just keep trying. I mean, there's nothing better, I think, than knowing that you've been able to help your agency or help, a local nonprofit get funding to do something that improves your community. And I guess what really made me stick with it was I was probably about 2 or 3 years into the helping with the local nonprofits. And there was a letter that came from our community foundation here in the county to this one nonprofit, and they crossed through the salutation on the letter, and he he crossed through the normal dear ma'am or sir or whatever, and wrote dear Victoria at the top of it, the person that ran the foundation that was giving grants. And that's when I knew I had established a good enough relationship with them that they knew it was me writing the grant application for these nonprofits as a volunteer. So, and that felt good. It felt good to know that they acknowledged that I was trying to help in the community. And I think that was even a better feeling than knowing that I'd gotten the funds, is knowing that, other people who were trying to help in the community knew that I was, a part of that team. So I
So
encourage you to join the team.
a couple of quick questions, and then we can probably let folks go.
Okay.
You're going to share with us the Mentimeter results, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we can get those put up on our website. Depending when you get them to us, we could even email them to the attendees. Um, again, reach out to Victoria about things. And do you have any other recommendations of places to look beyond the federal grant site and the one I posted from New York State? Do you have any other places you go
You
to
know,
places for grants?
I within our community, and this seems to be something I've seen in many counties across Ohio, there are community foundations where the county has a foundation that works with the smaller grantors. Maybe it's a family that has unfortunately lost a loved one and decided they wanted to provide funding for this reason or that reason, and they'll go through the foundation in order to provide those funds. So look to see if there is that kind of parent organization in your community that, has a list of different um, entities that are willing and do give grants. That's something that I don't think a lot of people realize, but it's a network that I have come to understand exists, at least here in Ohio, and it could very well exist there in New York as well. I mean, it sounds like on the state level, you guys have your grants much more coordinated. So I wouldn't be surprised to find out that you have these community foundations throughout New York too.
Okay, well, thank you. For those who are wondering, again, if you're looking for anything we post, it'll be in all of this, including the recording, will be on our webinars page on our website. And with that, Victoria, thank you very much for
Thank you,
doing this.
David.
And everybody have yourself a great day. It's a gray day, but it looks like a nice one. So take care, everybody, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.